This story begins with the news that the famous Princess Stella had arrived in Japan as the second princess of the Vermilion Empire, having entered the Magic Academy with the highest average of all the successful applicants. Among those who saw the news on television was a boy named Ikki, who dreamed of becoming a powerful knight, even though he was known for having the lowest level ever recorded and, compared to Stella, stood no chance against her. After Stella's arrival, newspapers and channels began to hound her as if she were a celebrity, trying to get statements from her. At that moment, Ikki got dressed, left the house, and walked down the street, recalling the words of his teacher, who had said that while he felt discouraged because of his low level, it meant he had not yet given up. So he summoned his sword and trained diligently, hoping to raise his level and achieve his dream of becoming a magic knight. After finishing training, Ikki returned to his room and was surprised to see Stella there, changing her clothes. When he saw her off guard, she flew into a rage and gave him a good beating. Afterward, they went to the academy's director, Corona, because Stella had complained and said she couldn't excuse Ikki for deliberately undressing in front of her. When Stella entered the office, Ikki apologized for the misunderstanding, but Stella refused to forgive him. Ikki then said he wasn't willing to pay with his life for something so small and that the request was unfair. Corona then left the office abruptly, leaving the two alone. Stella approached and stated that he would pay for invading her room. Ikki replied that it was his room too, and she calmed down after the automatic sprinklers on the ceiling were activated. They were both surprised when Corona returned and announced that they would be roommates from then on. Ikki wondered how they could share a room if they weren't even on the same level, since Stella was so much superior. Stella also wondered how someone like him, who had failed the academy's tests, could be there. He then explained that he was classified as an F rank and that his only special ability was to enhance his physical abilities. Corona explained that he was the weakest person in the academy and was nicknamed the worst. She concluded by saying that, for that very reason, she decided to put them in the same room, since no one was more inferior than Ikki and no one more superior than Stella. Stella realized she had no choice but to share a room with this loser, but she imposed 3 conditions. He was not to speak to her, nor look at her, nor breathe near her. She also allowed him to live directly across from her bedroom door. Ikki was irritated and found it unfair, as she didn't even want him to breathe, as if she thought he wanted to smell her. Corona suggested they stop arguing and resolve the situation with a sparring match, where the winner would have the right to set the rules for living in the room. Stella was surprised to see Ikki reluctant to fight her and told him he had no chance. He replied that they would only know the outcome if they actually fought. Corona determined that the duel would begin in an hour at the training grounds, and that the loser would become the victor's servant for the rest of their life, obeying all orders, no matter how silly or difficult. Stella began preparing for the fight, remembering the time she spent in her homeland when her mother tried to convince her to give up on becoming a magic knight. However, Stella had always wanted to become a strong warrior to serve her people and her nation. Therefore, she vowed to defeat Ikki as the first step toward realizing her dream. As she walked toward the training grounds, all her fellow academy students watched her, confused as to why a girl like her was about to fight the worst student in the school. Corona also wondered why he had accepted the challenge. Ikki explained that he needed to beat her to have a chance to participate in the 7 Stars Festival and graduate, even though his grade point average was low, as he believed Stella would participate in the tournament in the future. Stella entered the training grounds and, facing him, told him that he should give up on becoming a magic knight, as his skill level was not promising. Ikki replied that he had no intention of giving up or backing down before the duel. Stella realized that he was the kind of person who believed that effort could overcome talent, and she remembered when she had defeated someone in the past who also believed this and who had suffered a crushing defeat. The fight began, and both summoned their swords. Stella attacked first, and Ikki blocked her flaming attacks, admiring how he was able to keep up with her blows and movements. When it was Ikki's turn to attack, Stella was surprised to see that he had copied her technique and style to face her. He explained that he hadn't learned from anyone in a long time, and thus had a talent for using others' techniques against them. Stella decided to feign a false attack to deceive him, but he managed to block the blow with the hilt of his sword and hit her in the shoulder. However, he retreated when he realized she was about to transform. A magical aura began to emanate from Stella's body, and she decided to blend her magic with her sword skill to overcome him. She concentrated all the power of fire into her blade, creating a flaming dragon within the sword, and advanced to finish the fight with a single blow. However, she was shocked when Ikki began moving even faster, dodging all her attacks until he got close enough to land a a decisive blow. Afterward, Corona announced Ikki's victory over Stella, much to the surprise of everyone present. They both lost consciousness after the fight. When Stella woke up in the Academy hospital, she realized she had forgotten the feeling of losing and had now relived it at Ikki's hands. Corona explained that he was exhausted from using all his magical energy in the last minute of the fight, but his life was not in danger. Stella wondered why someone like him was considered the weakest and worst in the Academy. Corona explained that the rankings were based solely on students' magical abilities, without considering physical prowess or combat talent, and that although there was no system capable of evaluating Ikki fairly, he continued to believe in himself and never stopped improving. Therefore, he recommended that Stella follow his example if she wanted to improve. Afterward, Stella went to her room and apologized to Ikki for judging him as a failure. She explained that she had always hated people who pigeonholed her as a genius, which was why she had decided to study abroad. If she had seen his true strength, she wouldn't have lost like that. She was shocked when Ikki mentioned the duel's conditions, reminding her that she would now be his maid and obey his every command for the rest of her life. She tried to justify it and back out of the challenge, but he taunted her, saying she came from a family that didn't keep promises. Stella became irritated and agreed to obey his every command, thinking he would ask something strange, but he just smiled and asked her to become his roommate so they could grow closer. The next day, they woke up early to train before class, and Ikki told her he ran 20 kilometers every day and told her she didn't have to join him if she found it difficult, as she possessed enough magical power to compensate for her lack of physical stamina. Even so, she refused and insisted on training alongside him in a competitive spirit, as she wanted to improve. She noticed he seemed to be in a good mood that day, and he told her his sister was enrolling at the academy that day. After 4 years of not seeing her, the new teacher introduced herself as Yuri and explained that she would be the academy's new teacher. She then announced that, starting that year, the academy's representatives at the 7-Star Fighting Festival would be chosen based on combat ability, rather than average ability, as had been the case previously. The duels to select the representatives would begin the following week. When Stella asked how many duels each student would have, Yuri replied that each would participate in more than 10 matches, with one every 3 days. Ikki then realized that he would be able to use his special technique, since he could only use it once a day. He also understood that Yuri wanted to give everyone a fair chance to demonstrate their skills, and that students who didn't want to fight could withdraw without affecting their grades. The class was surprised when Yuri suddenly hemorrhaged and lost consciousness during class. After being taken to the academy hospital, she explained that she vomited a liter of blood a day. Stella then understood that this was the reason for her haggard appearance and the deep circles under her eyes. Ikki commented that he was only able to enter the academy thanks to her, as it was Yuri who accepted him. Stella then wanted to know how he had been admitted, and Ikki explained that, before his enrollment, the academy did not use standardized criteria to evaluate students' abilities. As they were talking, they were interrupted by the sound of a classmate named Kagami running up to Ikki enthusiastically, saying she was in the same class and his biggest fan. She praised his performance in the duel against Stella and mentioned that she was thinking about starting a journalism club at the academy, hoping to get a story about him on the front page of the student newspaper. Ikki replied that it wasn't that important. Stella became jealous and ironically suggested he accept the proposal and interview her for the story. Ikki asked Kagami to save the conversation for another time and went after Stella. Just then, he heard his sister Shizuku's voice and began searching for her until he finally found her. As he approached, Ikki said he had planned to look for her after all those years without seeing her, but he and everyone around were surprised when Shizuku ran up to him and kissed him. Kagami rushed to capture the scene in an exclusive photo. Shizuku explained that the kiss was a display of affection between two close people, prompting Stella to pick her up and throw her away, then scold Ikki for allowing it in front of everyone. When Ikki called her name, Shizuku realized that Stella was the princess everyone was talking about and questioned why she had interfered and prevented her from getting close to her brother. Shizuku asserted that Stella had nothing to do with it, as she was merely a princess from a neighboring country. Stella then replied that she was Ikki's maid, which gave her the right to intervene between them, and all the students were shocked to hear this. Stella continued to say that Ikki had the right to demand anything from her, even sleeping in the same bed with him. Shizuku, overcome with jealousy, decided to distance herself from him and summoned her sword to confront Stella. Iki tried to warn her that she couldn't do that in the academy lobby, but soon realized that Stella had also summoned her sword and accepted the challenge. The confrontation between the two began and caused great damage to the academy. They were then summoned by Principal Corono, who decided to punish them with a week of bathroom cleaning instead of suspensions. During that week, the two continued cleaning the bathrooms, exchanging verbal taunts the entire time without losing their temper. Shizuku told Stella to stay away from her brother forever. Stella replied that she couldn't promise that, since they shared a room, and that it was inappropriate for her to want to have a romantic relationship with her own blood brother. Stella asserted that Shizuku would never understand Iki's personality because she wasn't part of his family. Shizuku countered by asking if Stella knew what it was like to feel like she didn't exist, as Iki had been by everyone, and left silently, leaving Stella full of doubts. Afterward, Shizuku returned to her room and found her roommate, Nagi, while Stella waited for Iki to return after training. When he arrived, Stella hesitantly asked if he had been mistreated in the past and realized Shizuku had told her something. Iki replied that his story was a bit sad and began to tell her that he had been a student of his grandfather Ruma, the hero who led Japan to victory in the last World War, a man he aspired to become one day. Iki's family was known for its knights and magicians, but since he was so talentless from a young age, all his relatives completely ignored him and treated him as if he were invisible. He couldn't even find a seat at family gatherings. One year, he couldn't take it anymore and decided to run away from home. However, the weather was so bad that he got lost, and when he thought he might die, his grandfather appeared before him and said that the frustration of being the weakest was proof that he hadn't given up. Ruma lifted him up, told him not to give up, and assured him that if he had the courage, he could become anything he wanted. Even though these were just words, they saved Iki from falling into an abyss of despair. From that moment on, he resolved to become a man like his grandfather, someone capable of supporting and encouraging the weak, and so he aspired to become a powerful magic knight. Despite everyone's refusal to train or care for him, Iki began training alone. When he enrolled at the academy, his family was furious and tried to pressure the administration to expel him. The then principal decided to create special rules to prevent his graduation. Even though the principal was replaced, he expected the obstacles to continue, but he had no intention of giving up. Meanwhile, Shizuku told Nagi the story of her brother and how she always loved him, even after he left home. When she realized how poorly her family treated him, she began to despise everyone and decided to offer him all the affection he lacked. Nagi said he understood her discomfort with strangers and that her relationship with her family had worsened it, adding that he knew this because he was in a relationship with someone similar to her and asked Shizuku to come to him whenever she wanted to talk. A few days later, Iki and Stella were practicing fencing for the Star Fighting Festival qualifiers. After practice, Iki asked who Stella's opponent would be in the first match, and she replied that she would face a student named Mamatani. When Iki began talking about him, Stella interrupted him, saying she wasn't the type of person to know their opponent in advance. Iki realized for a moment that, despite their differences, the two were quickly becoming close. Their conversation was interrupted by the bell ringing for the first class, and as he was getting ready to leave, Stella wanted to ask him out the next day, since it was the weekend. But before she could finish her sentence, Iki received a text message. Stella thought it was something from the academy revealing her next opponent, but was surprised to see it was a message from Shizuku inviting Iki to go out with her the next day. She was even more surprised to see that he accepted immediately and responded quickly. The next day, Iki and Stella met up with Shizuku and Nagi. Shizuku was surprised that a princess like Stella would want to spend her free time with ordinary people like her and Iki, but Stella explained that she wanted to get to know Japan better and take a tour. Iki asked who Nagi was, and she said he was Shizuku's roommate and invited him to join the group. Iki couldn't tell if Nagi was a man or a woman, and heard Nagi introduce himself as a boy with a virgin's heart. After that, they began strolling through the malls, and Stella was uncomfortable when she saw Shizuku holding Iki's hand as they walked. Shizuku said it was normal between siblings, but when Stella also tried to hold his other hand, Shizuku accused her of having feelings for Iki. Stella was embarrassed and denied it. Meanwhile, the mall's security guards were monitoring the cameras until they were surprised by a mysterious figure who broke into the surveillance room and attacked them. He and his gang members then began raiding the mall, while, on the other side, Iki and the others were having lunch at a restaurant. Shizuku was surprised when he approached to wipe the food off her face with his hand. Stella then stuffed her face with food and grabbed a mug of beer like Santa Claus. But was disappointed when Iki went to get a towel. He then went to the bathroom with Nagi and was surprised by how quickly his sister trusted Nagi and had told him so much about their family, as she was usually very sensitive and shy around strangers. He thanked Nagi for becoming her friend. Their conversation was interrupted when they heard suspicious footsteps outside. One of the gang members burst into the bathroom upon realizing someone was hiding there and began shooting indiscriminately. Another gang member explained that the boss had ordered that civilians be targeted. Finding no one, they left the bathroom, and one of them took off his mask and threw it away. Nagi and Iki emerged from hiding and realized it was a gang robbing the mall. Nagi summoned his sword, and Iki realized he could use the element of shadows, controlling them to move from one place to another. When they reached the control room, they found the security guards tied up and unconscious, apparently drugged. Iki called Principal Corona to confirm if news of the mall robbery had spread. The principal explained that the police had arrived and surrounded the place, and that the gang was made up of magic users who demanded a large sum of money to release the hostages, but that she believed they were after more than just money. She then decided to authorize Iki and his companions to use swords and magic outside the academy, as requested by the police for backup. Meanwhile, Stella and Shizuku were among the hostages, and Stella noticed that the criminals were holding only women and children hostage. Shizuku whispered to her that she had a plan to get them out of that situation, but needed time and asked Stella to distract them until she was ready. Just then, they saw one of the criminals attacking a woman with a child. When he pointed his gun at the child, ready to kill him, Stella used her powers and saved the boy from death. The criminal became enraged and continued shooting at them, but the bullets didn't affect Stella's dress. She approached and declared that she had no intention of killing anyone. Then the gang leader ordered the criminal, named Yakin, to lower his gun. He then showed Stella respect and introduced himself as Bisho, reprimanding Yakin for attacking a defenseless child. Soon after, Bisho pointed his gun at the child's mother and stated that it wasn't the misbehaving boy's fault, but the parents'. Stella realized he intended to unjustly kill the woman, so she ran toward him and summoned her sword. She realized it was a trap to lure her in, and Bisho used his strength to block her blow and struck her with a punch so hard it nearly killed her. He explained that his technique was called the Ring of Justice, a style based on crime and punishment, where blocking an opponent's blow was the crime and striking her was the punishment. Bisho admired Stella for risking her life for the common people and decided to reward her by sparing the hostages, provided she knelt on the ground and apologized on the child's behalf. Meanwhile, Iki and Nagi watched from a safe place. Iki was irritated by Bisho's request, but he had to bide his time. As Stella began to follow his orders, Iki almost acted impulsively and ruined everything, but Nagi used her ability and trapped his shadow, preventing it from moving and exposing them. Nagi explained that her sister was creating a magical barrier without anyone noticing, and that Stella was just buying her time. As soon as Shizuku finished setting up the barrier, she used her powers to create a massive wall of water that separated the hostages from the criminals. When Bisho realized there was another sorceress among the hostages, he ordered them all eliminated. The gang members began shooting, but the bullets couldn't penetrate Shizuku's water. Iki appeared, summoned his sword, and used all his strength to fall from above onto the criminals. He then aimed at Bisho, successfully cutting off his left hand. Bisho became enraged and ordered his men to shoot, but when he looked around, he realized that Stella had defeated them all and only he remained. Iki then ran to her and hugged her, apologizing for taking so long to attack him. They were then surprised when a woman hiding among the hostages pointed a gun and threatened to kill one of the people if anyone fought back. Nagi ordered Bisho's shadow to be released, but the woman was quickly attacked by an unknown force and fainted. A mysterious man named Kirihara appeared out of nowhere, but he already knew Iki. Shortly thereafter, the police managed to catch up with the gang and rescue the hostages. Fans began to flock to the heroic Kirihara, who had finally taken the spotlight, and Shizuku and Stella agreed that they felt uncomfortable around this eccentric man. Iki approached to thank him for saving everyone. Kirihara said it was his duty to help the weak and began to mock Iki's ambition to become a magic knight, even though he was still studying at the academy. Stella became enraged and came to Iki's defense. Kirihara begged her to tell the truth, that Iki had once run away, afraid to face him in combat, and declared him nothing more than a useless coward. Kirihara then asked Iki to check his email. When he did, he found a message from the academy informing him that Kirihara would be his first opponent in the qualifying tournament for the annual festival. A few days later, the qualifying round began to select the academy's representatives for the 7 7-star fighting festival, and Stella defeated her first opponent with a landslide victory. When she returned to her room, she found Ikki watching a video of a previous duel with Kirihara to study his movements. He tried to detect him with his special technology, but couldn't identify a weak point. He thought that if Stella were his opponent, he would have given up the fight, as she could bypass his blind spot with ranged attacks. He explained that he had never faced anyone with that kind of technique, and that Kirihara's fighting style was far from noble, which is why everyone called him a hunter. Stella worried about Ikki, but he said he had already found a way to defeat him and was confident of victory. As time passed, Ikki trained intensely, feeling he had no choice but to win, until he encountered Nagi along the way. Nagi asked about his relationship with Kirihara, and Ikki explained that his family had attempted to contact the academy administration the previous year to expel him. Kirihara saw him as an easy target, so he challenged him to a duel and tried to convince him that the teachers would recognize his worth if they saw him fighting. Despite Ikki's refusal, Kirihara continued to provoke and attack him to force him to accept the challenge. Ikki, however, remained steadfast and refused to use his sword to avoid fighting back. Nagi realized that Ikki's true strength lay in his ability to endure, after all he had suffered, even when his own mind screamed for help, hoping that one day someone would finally hear his silent cries. The next day, Ikki met up with his teammates and still had an hour until the duel began, so he decided to sit in the waiting room. When he got there, he signed a document stating his agreement to participate in the qualifiers, knowing it would be a real fight and that he would put his life at risk. A girl named Nian was behind him and was impressed by how quickly he made such an important decision. She noticed he didn't hesitate like the other students and listened when he said he'd been waiting a long time for a chance to fight for real for the first time. She also noticed he knew a lot about her, including her name, her connection to Principal Kurono, and the fact that she worked as a part-time instructor at the academy. Nian approached and offered to give him private training that night, but was surprised when Kurono appeared behind her and scolded her for trying to seduce one of the students. The principal then dragged her outside, reminding her that she was the one who should be supervising the duels, not acting like a starry-eyed teenager. Ikki then stood alone and prepared to enter the fight, remembering everything he had faced in his life up until that point. He felt a strange sensation when he heard his name called and knew it was time to go to the arena. Ikki entered the arena before the crowd and came face to face with Kirihara, who immediately began to mock and belittle him. Both summoned their weapons, and when the fight began, Kirihara used his technology to transform the entire arena into a forest and disappeared as if he had never been there. Ikki remained alert, trying to find a way to counter the technique. He continued to dodge the arrows until he located his opponent and launched a melee attack. However, Kirihara managed to escape and realized Ikki was trying his best to win. Ikki stated that he could fire as many arrows as he wanted, as long as he would continue to block them. Kirihara disappeared again and challenged Ikki, saying he would indicate where he was shooting from so he could try to block, then fired an arrow that hit Ikki's right thigh and left arm. When Ikki was unable to defend himself this time, Kirihara explained that he had the ability to launch imperceptible arrows that were only felt once they had penetrated the target's body. Meanwhile, Ikki's friends realized he was in trouble after his plan failed. Stella wondered why he hadn't used his full power from the start of the fight, even though he'd prepared and trained so hard. Nagi replied that he couldn't do that it was difficult to make such a decision, and that's why he was nervous and didn't know what to do. Suddenly, Stella remembered his words that he would be fine and could win, and realized he had been nervous and acting strange the whole time, and that she, even though she was the person closest to him, hadn't noticed. Meanwhile, Kirihara continued to attack Ikki forcefully, causing serious injuries, while laughing at his dream of winning the annual festival to graduate. Some students also began to laugh at the idea of an F-rank student wanting to win the 7 Stars festival. Ikki heard Kirihara's laughter and sarcastic comments and tried to resist both the physical and psychological damage until he was hit in the chest and fell to the ground. Kirihara then incited everyone to mock him, making the audience repeat the expression to its worst. Stella was furious and couldn't contain herself until she shouted for everyone to be quiet and stop laughing at the knight she admired most. She scolded Ikki for giving up so quickly and demanded that he stand up. Ikki then stood up, punched himself, and thanked him for the encouraging words. He decided to use another strategy to break Kirihara's arrows. He used his extreme technique and began to remember the order in which he had been hit by the previous arrows. When Kirihara fired again, Ikki focused on every detail around him and was surprised to be able to block the arrow and break it with his fist. From then on, he blocked the arrows without needing to see, hear, or feel them before impact. He could locate Kirihara just by the tone of his voice, and Kirihara tried desperately to defend himself. But Ikki advanced with all his speed, aiming directly at Kirihara, who tried with all his might to escape. However, there was no escaping the blade of Ikki's sword, which stopped a millimeter from Kirihara's neck, at which point he admitted defeat. After that, Ikki was declared the winner of his first official fight and advanced to the next round. He looked at Stella with a smile before losing consciousness, exhausted after losing so much blood and draining all his energy. When he regained consciousness in the hospital, he found Stella sleeping beside his bed. When she woke up, she was embarrassed to realize he was watching her sleep. Ikki apologized for worrying her and exposing himself like that, and was surprised to suddenly tell her that he loved her and was happy that fate had brought them together. Stella asked him to close his eyes, and when he complied, she kissed him on the cheek. Ikki understood that this gesture was her way of saying she loved him too. He then hugged her and asked them to always be together, striving together to reach the highest level of chivalry. They agreed to face each other in the finals of the annual festival, and Stella promised that next time she wouldn't lose to him. 2 weeks later, Ikki continued to defeat his opponents in the qualifying rounds, racking up 5 consecutive victories, and was no longer seen as the worst of the worst, but rather as an uncrowned king. Kagami and some girls asked him to teach them sword training, and Stella became jealous when she saw so many fans gathering around him. The other boys also began to feel jealous, as Ikki was getting all the attention. The next day, Stella told him that it would be very generous of him to accept training talented girls with promising futures in the cavalry, and Ikki replied that he wanted to teach them so they could protect themselves if something happened to them. Stella was a little embarrassed by this response and went back to reading her magazine. She considered telling him how she felt 2 weeks after their meeting, but when she turned around, she saw that Ikki had fallen asleep. The next day, he began training Kagami and her friends, but Kagami seemed more interested in taking notes and gathering information for his reports. Soon after, the group was interrupted by the arrival of other boys, who were uncomfortable and began teasing Ikki for being surrounded by girls, even though he was just a loser. One of them pulled out a pistol as a weapon, but Ikki was able to defeat them without even using his sword. They then realized how strong he was and knelt to apologize. They told him they were simply jealous of his attention from all the girls in the class and wanted to become as strong as he was. They asked him to train them too, and Ikki humbly agreed to help them improve. From then on, the boys and girls began training together under his supervision, and he became very popular as an instructor, which impressed Stella. While they were talking, Stella wanted to offer him water as a way of showing interest, but was surprised when Shizuku approached and handed him a juice before she could. Stella became furious and, having no choice, ended up drinking 2 bottles of water herself. Then Shizuku asked Ikki to teach her how to sword fight, and when he mentioned that their family had a master swordsman who could do that, she replied that she hated her own family and didn't want to learn anything from them after they abandoned Ikki. Hearing this, Stella became jealous and also asked to be trained by him, even though she was twice his level. When she realized he almost refused, she pretended to ask just to see his reaction and left angrily. When she was alone, Stella ran into Nagi, who was looking for Shizuku, and noticed he was holding something in his hands. He explained that it was an autumn game borrowed from a classmate, and Stella realized that one of the game's protagonists looked a lot like Ikki. After that, Stella spent a good deal of time playing the game and quickly became engrossed in the story, as the hero reminded her so much of Ikki. Even the character's voice was very similar to his, and Stella began to enjoy it, but soon began to miss doing the things with him that couples in love often do, like walking hand in hand, hugging, and kissing. However, upon hearing his voice in the room and realizing he'd already been there for some time, Stella panicked. Ikki explained that he would take Shizuku and the other girls to the pool the next day as part of fencing practice, and Stella offered to accompany him. Ikki declined, explaining that their fighting styles were completely different. His style relied on deception, while hers relied on brute force, and he feared that training her in his style would undermine her swordsmanship. He asked her to always be the one to exceed his expectations. Stella felt he genuinely cared about her, so she decided to accompany him to the pool the next day. She sat beside him, feeling happy. When they arrived, Ikki explained to the students that the goal of the training was to increase lung capacity and help each student connect with themselves, listening to their inner voice, while a mysterious girl watched from afar. Stella, sitting further away, wanted him to spend time with her, so she decided to try the same exercise. listening to her own inner voice, and realized that this was the basis of Ikki's technique. She thought that if she could master it, she would be closer to him. But she was interrupted by the sound of a girl talking to Ikki, and some water got into her ears, causing her to nearly drown. When she emerged, she saw it was Kagami asking how far Ikki and Stella had progressed in their relationship. Stella denied they were dating, and was surprised to discover that Kagami wanted to go out with him to get to know him better. To put her off, Stella eventually admitted they were lovers, and Kagami promised to keep the secret. Meanwhile, Nagi advised Shizuku on how to get closer to her brother, and Kagami did the same with Stella, especially after realizing it had been 2 weeks since they had declared their love, with no progress in the relationship. When Ikki sat down with Stella, she was hesitant and asked him what he thought of her swimsuit. He coldly replied that it looked nice. He then said he wanted to talk about their relationship and what they should do from there. Stella assumed he wanted to break up because she had been distant and did nothing to show her love for him. When she confronted him about it, Ikki clarified that he didn't want to break up, but rather that he loved her and wanted to spend romantic moments with her. After a while, the mood between them calmed down, and he suggested they both simultaneously share what they were thinking about doing at that moment. They then revealed that they wanted to kiss, and finally did. On the way back, they were sitting side by side, holding hands like a normal couple until they received messages. They discovered that in their upcoming matches, they would face 2 student council executives. The next day, the fight began between Ikki and his opponent Renrin Tamaru. Tamaru used a speed-based technique to run at high speeds, creating a storm around him and impairing his vision while he stood still, ready to act. At the same time, Seiju swung his sword to increase the weight of the blow and attempt to defeat Stella with a single strike. Despite their efforts, the two were soundly defeated by the powerful duo, as their techniques had no effect. After that, the purple-haired girl continued to watch from afar. When Ikki reunited with his classmates, he told them he was being watched. He then looked at a tree across the lake and asked the person to come forward and tell them what they wanted. The girl realized she had been discovered and tried to run away, but tripped and fell into the lake. When they rescued her, she revealed her name as Ayase Ayatsuji, a third-year student. Ikki asked if she was related to Kaido Ayatsuji, and she replied that she was his daughter. Stella was intrigued. Kaido, as Ikki and Shizuku explained, was a talented swordsman known as the Last Samurai, winner of every known fencing tournament. But he was not known for not using magic in combat. Ikki was thrilled to meet the daughter of the man from whom he learned fencing, and whom he had admired since childhood. When he asked about her father's condition, Ayase said he had suffered an accident in combat and was hospitalized. Shizuku was blunt and asked why she had been observing Ikki for a week. Ayase explained that she wanted advice on fencing, but didn't know how to approach a man she didn't know. Ikki said he didn't mind if she wanted to join the training team, and over time, she began training with him using wooden swords. Ikki realized that the reason she wasn't improving was because she felt pressured to reach her father's level. He said that trying to imitate him would only hinder her progress, since they were of different genders, and suggested she adjust her movements to suit her own body. He began adjusting her leg position. Ayase felt the difference in her movements, and he assured her that she would soon get used to it. When she attacked him, she realized she was moving with greater speed and precision, admired his genius, and called him her fencing teacher. That night, Stella was jealous of Ayase's closeness to Ikki. When she asked Shizuku if she was also bothered, she was surprised by her answer, as Shizuku said she would be happy, even if she wasn't his partner, as long as there was someone who made him happy. Ayase, in turn, asked Ikki to train her from now on, as she believed she would become stronger under his guidance, and wanted to win the qualifiers and qualify for the 7 Stars Festival. The next day, Ayase trained with Stella and noticed that she had improved significantly after correcting her movements. When they finished, Ayase invited them to dinner as a thank you for their help. She said that since she started training with them, she felt she could reach her father's level. They were interrupted by the arrival of some boys, including an arrogant young man named Kurado. When Ikki asked them to leave quietly, Kurado commented that he looked like a swordsman, and that he only wanted to say hello when he saw a familiar face. He then handed him a bottle of juice as an apology for his rudeness. When Ikki seemed receptive, Kurado surprised him by mocking his weak defense, despite being a swordsman, and seemed amused as he insulted him, challenging him to a duel on the spot. Since the restaurant had been emptied, Stella became enraged and almost attacked him, but Iki stopped her, saying that the other had merely slipped and there was no point in fighting. Kurado laughed at Iki's peaceful reaction and approached to spit in his face. Stella tried to attack him, but was restrained once more. Kurado gave up and decided to leave. Iki explained to Stella that he couldn't cause trouble in a public place, and that if he accepted the duel and used his sword, he could be expelled from the academy, as he wasn't sure he could defeat Kurado without it. At that moment, two mysterious individuals approached the conversation. One of them told Iki that he had been right to suspect Kurado's strength, as he was a star at Dinero Academy and had reached the top 8 in the previous year's festival. When Stella asked who the two were, Iki replied that they were Hagen Academy Vice President Yudakata Masogi and Kanata Tadakubara. Yudakata then treated Iki's head wound. After they left, Iki told Ayase he'd like to help her as a friend if she was ever in trouble because of those people. But before she could respond, they both received messages and learned they would face each other in the academy's next qualifying match. A few days later, Ayase stopped showing up to training with Iki and his friends, and that evening, Iki received a message from her asking to meet on the rooftop of a building because she needed help. When Nagi read the message, she warned him it could be a trap and suggested Iki be prepared to end their friendship with her if something unexpected happened. Still, Iki decided to go on his own to find out what was going on. Upon arriving, he found Ayase waiting for him. Iki asked her what she wanted, and she replied that she had heard about his and Stella's promise to face each other again at the annual festival. She then asked what he would do if he had to fight an invincible opponent. She then summoned her sword, and Iki was surprised to see her throw herself from the top of the building. He was then forced to use his technique to reach her before she fell, deflecting their movement so that they fell into the water. After that, he understood that she had planned the whole thing to force him to use his technique, since he could only use it once a day, and their fight would begin in 10 hours, with no time to recover. This increased her chances of victory. Iki wondered why she wanted to win so badly, but Ayase wouldn't reveal her reason, saying she would defeat him no matter what. She walked away, and when Iki returned to his room, he collapsed in Stella's arms, exhausted. Iki woke up the next day in the hospital and saw his friends beside him. Glancing at the clock, Stella explained that there was still time until the match began. Soon after, Principal Corona appeared and asked him to accompany her to see something. Iki realized that she already knew of the destruction he had caused while saving Ayase, so he said he was willing to accept the punishment but couldn't reveal the details. She then shared some information about his opponent, Ayase, and explained that her father lost the ability to wield a sword after being defeated by Kurado in a duel. The terms of the match stipulated that if Kaido lost, his family estate would be transferred to Kurado. After the match, Kaido fell into a coma for 2 years. Meanwhile, Ayase sat beside her father, remembering everything Kurado had done to them and the suffering he had caused, vowing to qualify for the annual festival to fight and defeat him. Remembering her father's advice, she vowed to regain everything they had lost. Nagi realized this was what made Ayase so strong and desperate at the same time, and warned Iki that she would do anything to defeat him. Iki then asked Stella to accompany him, as he needed to resolve something before the fight. When the moment arrived, Iki entered the arena and stood face to face with Ayase, and everyone in the audience was excited to see the fight between master and disciple. Ayase was impressed to see him there, even though she couldn't use her technique, as she believed he would forfeit the fight. Stella wondered what Ayase's exact abilities were, but Nagi explained that this was her first official competition, and that her skills and techniques were still unknown, so the outcome would depend entirely on her performance. When the fight began, Iki stepped forward to attack, and Ayase lightly tapped the hilt of her sword with her finger and struck him with a powerful blow without moving. Everyone was stunned by what they had just seen, and she continued to attack him, tearing his body apart with her blows. Iki realized that she must have set several traps without his notice and was attacking him through them. Nagi reflected and realized that Ayase had broken the rules by setting traps before the official start of the fight. Ayase tried to corner Iki, luring him into more traps, and was surprised when he managed to dodge one of them. She seized the opportunity and struck him with another trap, severely injuring his left arm. Iki was forced to defend himself throughout the fight, until Ayase nearly landed a fatal blow, which he managed to block in time with the hilt of his sword. He confirmed her suspicions and asked Yuri to ignore Ayase's deliberate violation of the rules, as he trusted her to do so. When Yuri asked why he asked this, Iki explained that he wanted to confirm his own feelings and understand whether or not he truly wanted to end his friendship with Ayase, as if he did, he would lose the fight. During the battle, Iki told Ayase that she was ignoring everything he had taught her and that her movements and combat style were confused because she was trying to deceive herself and create a distorted version of herself, dominated by pride. Ayase replied that she didn't care about principles or values and would do anything to win and regain what her family had lost. Iki decided to end the fight his way and advance toward her, dodging all the traps with his perfect vision technique. Ayase thrust her sword into the ground, activating all the traps simultaneously, making it impossible to dodge. Even so, Iki leaped toward her and began attacking her. When she blocked the blow, she realized it was merely an illusion, and that Iki had managed to dodge the real attacks and position himself for the decisive blow. At the last moment, Iki changed the sword's form to an illusion, avoiding actually cutting her. Her companions then realized he had never intended to finish her off, and that his plan from the beginning had been to drain her energy until she could no longer move. Ayase realized this when her body could no longer fight. When he asked her if she had rediscovered her soul through her own pride during the fight, her sword disappeared, and she realized she had been deceiving herself all along. Iki offered to help her regain what she had lost, saying she had only strayed a little, but had not yet failed as a daughter. She felt as if her own father were standing before her, reaching out, and she began to cry, asking for help. Ayase then began to tell her about her father, known as the Last Samurai. She said he stopped practicing fencing when she was still in elementary school because of a heart condition, but continued to teach his students. 2 years ago, Ayase's father trained her to master his secret technique, always reminding her not to forget her pride, to protect the weak, and to hate evil. Ayase realized his time was running out shortly before he was defeated and fell into a coma after the confrontation with Kurado. Stellar researched Kurado and discovered that he invaded and destroyed gyms and martial arts centers throughout the city, known as the Sword Eater because of his dueling style. Ayase said that when Kurado challenged her father 2 years earlier, he didn't even need to use special techniques. Iki understood why Kaido was called the Last Samurai, and Ayase remembered the day he faced Kurado, which was like a nightmare for her. That day, she begged him repeatedly to stop fighting, but he remained steadfast, trying to prevent Kurado from hurting her or any of his students. Kurado mocked his principle of fighting to protect others, and the fight continued, with Kaido being severely injured. Finally, he tried to use his own technique to win, but Kurado struck him with a blow that knocked him down for good. Ayase felt angry at Kurado and regretted not having challenged the man herself in her father's place. She blamed herself for everything that had happened to her family. In the present, Ayase arrived with the others at her father's old house and found it to be in chaos, dominated by Kurado and his followers, and no longer the home she knew. Iki then entered Ayase's old family home to find Kurado and challenged him to a single duel, aiming to reclaim the home that had belonged to her family. Kurado mocked him, saying he was in a very different mood than the day he had intimidated him at the restaurant. Iki then showed all the fake documents belonging to Kurado, who accepted the challenge and summoned his sword-eating weapon. When Iki drew his sword, he charged forward, blocking Kurado's blows until he found an opportunity to counterattack. However, he was surprised to see Kurado block his attack. Despite his seemingly perfect reaction time, Kurado continued attacking even from afar, and Stellar realized the fight would be difficult for Iki, as he couldn't reach an opponent fighting out of his reach. The two continued exchanging blows until Kurado managed to wound Iki in the abdomen after dodging an attack. Iki deduced that Kurado was using the same technique he had used to defeat Kaido, which relied on reaction speed, and began analyzing this ability in detail. Kurado was impressed that Iki had discovered the secret to his technique in their first fight, but stated that even so, he wouldn't be able to overcome him, as it was an innate characteristic. Kurado then attacked again, this time using his maximum speed to further hinder Iki's defense, wounding him in the chest. Iki survived a potentially fatal blow after tripping over his own steps, yet he still tried to keep up with Kurado's speed while smiling. Stella could tell Iki was having fun fighting a strong opponent like Kurado. When Ayase tried to approach to stop the fight, Stella stopped her, saying she wouldn't get her family home back if she did. She then asked if her father had been humiliated. Ayase replied that they would all live happily if Kurado hadn't invaded their lives and taken everything from them. Stella commented that Kaido had found pleasure in fighting Kurado, even after being sidelined by his failing health, losing the ability to do what he loved most. Ayase realized her father had apologized before passing out because he had given in to his emotions and sacrificed everything just to face a strong opponent and relive the days of the past. With the fight still ongoing, Stella noticed that Kurado's weak point was his physical stamina, which was quickly depleting. Iki then pondered what Kaido would answer if asked if he was capable of smiling while facing a battle like that. Kaido replied that if he hadn't been enjoying that heated combat, no one would call him the last samurai. Iki decided to end the fight and promised Aice that they would regain everything they had lost. Both used their techniques to their fullest, but Kurado was surprised to see that Iki didn't try to dodge his long-range attacks and ran straight toward him. When Iki got close enough, Aice realized he had used his father's technique, and when asked how he had learned it, Stella replied that Iki had used the ability to copy techniques, just as he had done with other swordsmen. Kurado then turned and asked his name. When Iki answered, he simply left the house, saying they would continue the fight at the annual festival, and that he no longer needed this place. After he left, Aice apologized for Iki having to fight because of her and admitted that she knew nothing about her father or what it meant to live as a knight. Iki said she was able to win because she remembered her father's technique, and that no one understood Kaido better than she. He declared that she deserved to be the true successor of the last samurai, and Aice then resolved to do her best to become stronger, and confidently declare herself her father's successor. After reclaiming the family home and restoring it to its original state, Iki and Stella left. Stella explained that Aice admitted to the Academy Committee that she had cheated in the duel against Iki, and for this, she was removed from the rankings and given a 10-day suspension. Soon after, Iki received a letter from Aice saying that her father had finally regained consciousness after 2 years in a coma. He felt relieved and understood that things were finally returning to normal for Aice's family. A week later, Iki continued to advance in the qualifiers and achieved his 12th victory. The principal then decided to invite him and Stella to a training camp in Okutama as a break. Stella was happy to have some alone time. Shizuku, on the other hand, was frustrated that she couldn't stop the two from traveling alone, and Nagi matter-of-factly said that it didn't seem like the romantic, peaceful getaway she'd imagined. Upon arriving, Iki and Stella were surprised to find the members of the Hagen Academy Student Council. Renren challenged Stella to a game of tennis, but their style was nothing like the sport, more like a battle between a dragon and a tiger. Kanata explained that they hadn't come here to play, but rather to clean and prepare the venue, as the student council representatives would be arriving in a month. Stella realized that the student council duties were very tedious and decided she should pitch in to finalize the preparations. Yudakata mentioned that the student union president wanted to meet Iki but was absent that day due to work. Kanata informed her that she would arrive later that day, and Stella was furious to realize that the trip was no longer just between her and Iki. Meanwhile, Shizuku returned to the family home and was greeted by her pet cat after helping Kanata and the others clean up. Iki and Stella decided to visit the waterfall up close. They were told that President Tuko would arrive in an hour. On the way to the waterfall, Iki noticed that Stella was exhausted. She explained that she had eaten 2 very large plates for lunch and was feeling full. Iki offered to take her back to camp, but she declined because they were finally having some alone time, so they walked together to the waterfall. Elsewhere, Shizuku was leafing through an album of childhood photos of Iki until she was interrupted by a maid, who informed her that her father was waiting for her downstairs. That night, Stella continued to suffer from the weight on her body, but insisted on going forward. She said she felt dizzy, heavy, and had the urge to vomit. She thought she might be pregnant because of the kiss she had shared with Iki earlier. Iki explained that was impossible and suggested she might have caught a cold. She then decided they would return to camp. Unfortunately, it began to rain, and a mysterious figure watched them from afar. They sought shelter in a small mountain camp until the rain stopped. Iki noticed she had a fever and a high temperature, so he suggested they take off their wet clothes to prevent the situation from worsening. Stella replied that she didn't mind him being hot because of her, and Iki said he wanted to tell everyone he loved her before anything more happened between them. Stella realized he was serious about their relationship, but before they could continue the conversation, Iki received a call from colleagues worried about them both. Meanwhile, the mysterious figure watching them received the order to put their plan into action. Elsewhere, Shizuku met with Iki's father and urged him to get straight to the point, as he had returned home after receiving a letter from his mother. He revealed that he had made his wife write the letter because he knew Shizuku wouldn't read it if it were from him, and explained that he just wanted to know if she was okay living alone. Itsuki, their father, said he was proud of her for winning 12 consecutive matches in the festival qualifiers. which he considered a great achievement. Shizuku replied that her brother had also done the same, but he didn't seem to care, so she returned to her room. Meanwhile, Ikki was sitting alone after Stella fell asleep when he felt a sudden vibration, as if something had struck the hut. He went out to check and saw a huge stone monster waiting for him. As soon as he saw it, the monster destroyed the hut with one blow. Ikki managed to save Stella using his maximum speed, then brought her to safety, summoned his sword, and destroyed the monster with a single blow. However, to his surprise, the monster had the ability to reform itself into several creatures made of smaller stones. One by one, Ikki began eliminating them, until one of them managed to inflict a serious wound. When the monsters noticed Stella's presence, they ignored Ikki and charged straight toward her. It was at this point that the Hagen Academy Student Council members appeared to offer assistance. Renren managed to carry Stella away while the others dealt with the monsters. Ikki thought perhaps someone was controlling these creatures that kept emerging, no matter how badly they were damaged. Utakata then commented that it was likely the work of the steel thread user. Soon after, President Tuka appeared and explained that the monsters were linked by magical powers, requiring them to follow this connection until they found whoever was controlling them. She then used her superhuman strength to crush the monsters and eliminate them in one fell swoop. However, they all coalesced again, forming an even larger stone creature, which was eventually destroyed by Tuka's overwhelming technique. She then launched a light attack with her magical powers that directly struck the person commanding the monsters, causing serious injuries. The enemy's boss commented that there were several ways to intercept this type of attack. Tuka climbed onto the pile of rocks left by the monster, and Ikki realized she was Princess Tuka, one of the top 4 finishers in the previous year's annual festival. Meanwhile, Shizuku received a message from the academy informing her that her next match would be against Tuka. A few days later, the news spread through the newspapers, and upon learning that Shizuku would face Tuka in her next duel, many predicted it would not be an easy fight. However, Nagi believed Shizuku would do well, as she could use the purest water in her magic, and Tuka couldn't conduct electricity through it. Stella decided to check on Shizuku and asked if she was nervous. Shizuku replied that she wasn't nervous enough to affect her concentration. She explained that Ikki was worried about her and didn't want her to push herself too hard during the match, and that Stella was only there to support her. Afterward, Shizuku and Nagi reflected that Ikki wouldn't have been worried if Stella had been the one facing Tuka, as he trusted her abilities. Shizuku felt she wasn't strong enough yet and decided to strive to become more powerful and worthy of being at Ikki's side. She promised to prove it in the next day's fight. The next day, Shizuku went to the battlefield fully prepared to face Tuka and decided to give her all to show Ikki she was strong enough. Ikki realized her sister wasn't willing to make the first move because of Tuka's special technique, whose faster-than-light sword could cut through any opponent that approached. Shizuku then transformed the arena into an ice-covered floor and began attacking Tuka from a distance. Tuka ran toward her and began exchanging attacks at close range, until Shizuku managed to trap her in ice and hit her with a giant block. Everyone was astonished when Tuka shattered the block with her strength, reducing it to crumbs. Shizuku was impressed that Tuka could react even when she attacked from blind spots, and began to wonder if Tuka could see beyond what she could see. She wondered when and how Tuka had managed to hit her, and soon received another blow that nearly killed her. But Tuka realized she had hit a shadow of water. Although the fight started evenly, Tuka gained the advantage with her extreme speed, both in movement and attack, and Shizuku's wound prevented her from keeping up. Ikki then realized that his sister couldn't read all of her opponent's movements due to her own mental limitations, and recognized that Tuka possessed skills only a demon princess could master. Hirano approached and mentioned that Tuka had been a student of Nango Torajaru, the god of swordsmanship, and Ikki realized his sister would stand no chance against Tuka's technique. Stella shouted, encouraging Shizuku to do her best. Shizuku didn't mind the encouragement, but vowed to do beyond her best to win and qualify for the annual festival along with her brother and friends. She used her powers to heal her own injuries and decided to attack. Even though she couldn't keep up with her opponent's movements, Shizuku began to attack with all her might, while Tuka quickly dodged until she got close enough to attempt a crushing blow, but she was surprised to realize she had only hit another water shadow. Then, several Shizuku clones appeared behind her and began attacking her. Shizuku then covered the arena with mist, which clearly negatively affected Tuka's mobility. Shizuku continued attacking from all sides, and when the decisive moment arrived, she rushed toward Tuka to end the fight in her favor. However, she was shocked when Tuka used her final card and delivered a knockout blow without even realizing it, eliminating all the mist and ice associated with Shizuku's powers in one fell swoop. The commentator announced the end of the match with Tuka's victory, and Iki understood that his sister's final attack hadn't been suicidal, but rather the best move she could have made to try and win. Afterward, Shizuku regained consciousness and found her friends by her side. When she realized she had lost the fight, she asked them to leave her alone for a while. Iki and Stella left silently, telling her she would be fine, as she was stronger now. Neji, however, remained by Shizuku's side and refused to leave. He hugged her and asked her to let her feelings flow before him, without pretending to be strong all the time. A few days later, the Academy newspaper published the photos and names of the top contenders for the annual festival: Iki, Stella, and Tuka. The principal called Iki into her office and asked if he had ever heard of a man named Akaza from the International Magic Knight Federation. Iki replied that he had met him a few times when he lived in the family home, as Akaza was a subordinate who worked with his father. Corona said that Akaza was trying to uncover a secret about the academy and that he had likely been encouraged by Iki's father. Iki believed Akaza was acting on his own, as he had always detested him. Corona then concluded that perhaps Akaza hated Iki's family because he was only a minor member, which made him feel inferior, and she decided to play her part in protecting the students and the academy's secrets. Stella went to the student council room and found Tuka tripping over one of Yudakata's magazines. Stella scolded her and Seiju for not putting things back and leaving the room disorganized. Noticing Iki and Stella, Tuka greeted them and apologized for not introducing herself properly earlier. Stella found her personality quite different from what she had imagined. They all went to a social welfare institution and were warmly welcomed by the children. Yudakata explained that they had grown up in a similar place in Fukuoka and that they used to visit the children whenever they could. One of the children recognized Stella from seeing her picture on television, and soon the children gathered around her and asked to play. While Stella and Renren enjoyed their time with the children, Iki prepared food alongside Yudakata and Tuka. He thanked Tuka for saving them that day and for engaging in such an intense fight with his sister, and eventually realized that he had discovered the secret to her technique. Tuka had purposely removed her glasses so she couldn't see, which increased the power of her technique, known as reverse vision. Afterwards, she asked everyone to rest while she prepared the food. Iki realized that for some reason he couldn't take his eyes off her, and Yudakata commented that this was because he was seeing Tuka's essence and the source of her power. She then explained that there are things more complicated than Tuka's power, and revealed that his story was that of a child whose parents destroyed his soul from within, until he became an aggressive and broken person, someone who hurt Tuka countless times. Even so, Tuka never gave up on him until he was able to become human again. She added that Tuka's goal in life is to make everyone smile and offer memories that support them in difficult times, which she always tries to do with the children. Iki realized that Tuka used her ability to support others and that this was the source of her strength, which made him wonder about the origin of his own strength. That night, Iki and Stella returned to the academy and were surprised to see several classmates running toward them. They discovered that a photo of the two kissing had been published in the academy newspaper and spread nationwide, especially since Stella was a foreigner. Akaza approached in his luxury car and asked Iki to accompany him to the ethics committee hearing. When they arrived at the International Magic Knight Federation headquarters, Akaza and the committee members began questioning him and asked about the beginning of his relationship with Stella. Iki told them the whole truth, denying that they had done anything inappropriate during her stay in Japan, and asserting that he loved her and was serious about their relationship. Afterward, he was placed in a special cell until the interrogations resumed the following day. Meanwhile, Stella continued to win every stage of the festival's qualifiers, and everyone whispered about her secret relationship with Iki. The interrogation lasted 4 days, and Iki was surprised to discover that his next fights would be held at the Federation headquarters instead of the gym. He barely managed to win the fight, and the news was published in several newspapers and websites. Stella felt guilty and considered ending the relationship, believing that this way Iki could return to a normal life. Shizuku was furious at this idea and confronted her at the restaurant in front of everyone. She said Iki was facing this difficult situation because he refused to accept that the relationship had ended in shame. She remembered what Iki Iki had told her when they were in the cabin, and stated that she would never forgive Stella if she betrayed him and left him in that condition. A week later, Iki won his 16th fight in the qualifiers and, already exhausted, was surprised by his opponent, who approached and discreetly placed a small handkerchief in his pocket. When he returned to his room, he found a piece of Stella's hair inside the handkerchief. He understood that she was doing her best to fulfill their promise and win the duels until she met him at the annual festival. During the interrogation, Iki asked to see his father to present proof of his innocence. The next day, he was allowed to meet with him. Itsuki expressed admiration for his son's progress in the qualifiers and said he was doing well. Iki then understood that the source of his strength was the desire for praise and recognition from his family, which was why he left home and risked himself to become stronger. He asked if his father would recognize him as worthy if he won the annual festival. Itsuki understood that his son felt rejected and unappreciated because of his weakness, but he asserted that this belief was wrong, as he had always been recognized. The problem was that, for him, teaching techniques to those without talent was a waste of time and effort. Iki was shocked to hear that everything he had achieved so far represented only average strength for someone of his blood, and that this was the worst thing that could happen to a member of that family. Overcome with rage and despair, Iki began to see everything around him in shades of red. His father then continued to say that powerless people develop useless confidence, and that individuals who shouldn't do anything end up believing they can. Iki realized, bitterly, that his father didn't hate him, but simply never had feelings or expectations for him, and that their relationship was ruined from the start. After that, Iki continued his routine, divided between investigations and fights, living as if dead inside after his encounter with his father. This continued until the 18th day of his detention in the Federation, when Akaza informed him that his next opponent would be Tuka, the student council president, and Akaza himself said that this duel would define Iki's destiny as a magic knight. Iki remained alone, pondering how he should face Tuka with his empty, worthless sword, still hearing his father's harsh words in his mind. Meanwhile, Tuka called Shizuku into her room and said she suspected the duel between her and Iki had been deliberately set up to put him under pressure and in a vulnerable position. Tuka added that she knew how bad he was, both physically and mentally, and that he still wouldn't give up. Therefore, she asked Shizuku to suggest he forfeit, as she would fight with her soul and strength to defeat him and didn't intend to use any dirty tricks. Shizuku returned to her room reflecting on this and asked Naji if she should really take this action. Naji replied that only she could decide, as she was the only one who had welcomed Iki as part of the family and knew how strong Tuka was. Tuka, on the other hand, wondered if she would feel proud of qualifying for the festival if Iki withdrew, or if she fought him knowing he wasn't at his best. Yudakata told her she should do her best and fight in a way she could be proud of. The next day, it was time for the long-awaited final, from which 6 duelists would be chosen to represent the Academy in the annual festival. The most anticipated of the 6 matches was Iki versus Tuka, which everyone called the duel of the century. Meanwhile, Kurono was furious that Akaza had succeeded in carrying out his plan and believed there was only one way for Iki to prove himself right, by winning the fight. Akaza appeared sarcastically and said that since Iki hadn't arrived at the arena yet, the fight would be cancelled and Tuka would be declared the winner 15 minutes after his absence. Kurono reminded him that the Federation had promised to bring him in a special car, to which Kurono replied that Iki had left alone earlier. At that moment, Iki was walking alone, weakened and dejected, recalling his grandfather's words with despair. To his surprise, another version of himself appeared nearby and said that the old man had planted irresponsible words in his heart all those years, and that he had chosen to take them seriously and live beyond his means, until he ended up carrying a sword no one wanted. This version tried to discourage him, asking him to stop fighting, to call a truce, to abandon the idea of facing Tuka. But then a spark of hope lit within him, and he felt as if he could see sunlight again. Iki then regained consciousness in Shizuku's arms, who told him she didn't want him to fight Tuka, but that she believed in him. Then he saw all his teammates gathered, cheering and encouraging him to overcome Tuka and believe in his strength. When he saw Stella holding the qualification medal for the festival, he summoned all his courage and determination to fulfill the promise he had made to her. Iki arrived on the battlefield, and Tuka had no choice but to face him, even though he was in a pitiful state. She assured him that her injuries wouldn't stop her from giving her all in the fight. Iki replied that he didn't intend to appear weak in front of her, and that he would fight with everything he had. When the fight began, everyone was surprised to see him immediately use his special technique, while Stella realized that he had decided from the beginning not to use tricks to beat her, wanting wanting a fair fight. The two began anticipating each other's movements to dodge and attempt the decisive blow. Then they rushed at each other, and Ikki used all his strength and physical energy in a single attack to seal the fight, to the point where he began bleeding from various parts of his body due to the extreme adrenaline. The fight ended in front of everyone when Tuka's sword shattered and she fell limp, while Ikki remained standing with his arm raised, declaring his overwhelming victory. On the other side, Akaza was stunned, in disbelief that Ikki had won, even in that condition and against such a powerful opponent, with just a single strike. Kurono said he had expended all his energy in a single sword strike, unlike before, when his technique lasted a minute, and that he wouldn't have won with just the special technique. Master Nungu, the god of fencing, commented that what existed within him was beyond human limits, and could not be endured by an ordinary person. Akaza became enraged and left the stands, grumbling about the result. He went toward the arena with an axe in hand to attack Ikki, but was quickly struck by Stella's sword, who ran to the arena to find Ikki after waiting for him. As soon as Ikki saw her, he tried to stand because he wanted to tell her something. As he tried to lean on his sword to get closer, it disappeared, and he nearly fell. But Stella caught him, telling him he had done a great job and deserved the victory, and that she loved him exactly the way he was. She hugged him in front of everyone, and Ikki realized that the warmth he felt in that moment was what saved him from falling into the abyss of darkness. He then decided to propose to her right there, in front of everyone, and she was overjoyed and agreed to be his wife, amid the crowd's cheers. Meanwhile, Itsuki received a call from the Emperor of Vermilion, Stella's father, who had witnessed his children's official union and asked them not to involve the two in adult matters and to let them live in peace. Itsuki agreed. A few days later, Akaza was dismissed from his position. Ikki spent time in the hospital recovering from his injuries and, over time, returned to normal. Principal Kurono announced the 6 candidates who would participate in the festival representing the academy, and everyone recognized Ikki's strength as a magic knight. Tuka then announced that she would take over as student council president next year, receiving a standing ovation. She then called Ikki to give a speech as the new president, and said how proud she was of him at that moment, urging him to lead the academy to the top of the 7 Stars Festival. Realizing everyone had high hopes for him, Ikki understood that being recognized and making a good impression was a wonderful feeling. And with that, we conclude the first part of this story. Like if you enjoyed it and subscribe for more videos.